At the heart of this tragic tale were two sisters, Jessica and Cassandra Lawrence, whose lives had been intertwined in a complex web of love, rivalry, and resentment since childhood. Cassandra, the elder of the two, had always been the golden child, beautiful, accomplished, and married to the charming and successful architect, Dominic Blunt. Their union was the envy of Millhaven, a seemingly perfect marriage that everyone aspired to emulate. Jessica and Cassandra were born into a family of moderate means, their father a local fisherman, and their mother a schoolteacher. From an early age, it was clear that the two sisters were as different as night and day. Cassandra, with her gentle demeanor, was the pride of her parents. She excelled in school, was beloved by her teachers, and seemed to navigate the social waters of Millhaven with effortless grace. Her path in life seemed predetermined. She would go to college, find a respectable job, and settle down with a good man to start a family of her own. Jessica, however, was a force of nature from the moment she could walk. She possessed a wild spirit that both intrigued and unsettled those around her. While equally intelligent as her sister, Jessica's academic achievements were overshadowed by her rebellious nature and penchant for pushing boundaries. As they grew older, the differences between the sisters only became more pronounced. Cassandra pursued a degree in education, following in her mother's footsteps, while Jessica bounced between various majors, never quite finding her place. It was during this time that Jessica's manipulative tendencies began to surface. She would charm her way out of trouble, using her wit and allure to bend situations to her advantage. Jessica's relationships were always intense but short-lived. She seemed to thrive on the chaos of new romances, only to grow bored once the initial excitement faded. This pattern left a trail of broken hearts and bitter exes in her wake, further cementing her reputation as the black sheep of Millhaven. Cassandra, meanwhile, had returned to her hometown after college and quickly caught the eye of Dominic Blunt, a rising star in the world of architecture. Dominic had come to Millhaven to oversee the restoration of the town's historic lighthouse, but found himself captivated by the town's gentle beauty, both in its landscape and in Cassandra herself. Their courtship was swift and passionate, culminating in a fairy tale wedding that was the talk of the town for months. Dominic's career continued to flourish, and soon he and Cassandra were living in a beautiful home overlooking the ocean, their life together seeming like a modern-day fairy tale. But beneath the surface of their perfect marriage, cracks were beginning to form. Cassandra, always the dutiful daughter and wife, found herself yearning for something more. She had given up her own dreams of travel and adventure to settle in Millhaven, and a part of her resented the sacrifices she had made for the sake of her marriage. Dominic, for his part, was battling his own demons. The pressure of his high-profile career and the expectations of small-town life weighed heavily on him. He loved Cassandra deeply, but there were moments when he felt suffocated by the perfection they were expected to maintain. It was into this delicate balance that Jessica re-entered their lives. Having spent years drifting from city to city, she returned to Millhaven, claiming to want to reconnect with her roots. In reality, she was running from yet another failed relationship and mounting debts, seeking refuge in the only place she knew would take her in. Cassandra, ever the loving sister, welcomed Jessica with open arms, offering her a place to stay until she got back on her feet. But as Jessica settled into life in the Blunt household, the dynamics between the three began to shift in subtle yet profound ways. The stage was set for a drama that would shake Millhaven to its very core, forever altering the lives of all involved. At first, her presence seemed to breathe new life into Cassandra and Dominic's relationship. Evenings were filled with laughter and reminiscence, as the sisters caught up on lost time, with Dominic playing the role of the attentive husband and brother-in-law. But as days turned to weeks, Jessica's true intentions began to surface. Her eyes would linger on Dominic a moment too long, her casual touches becoming more frequent and deliberate. She would find excuses to be alone with him, asking for help with her car, seeking advice on job applications, or simply catching him in the kitchen late at night when Cassandra had already gone to bed. Dominic, initially oblivious to Jessica's advances, found himself increasingly drawn to her vibrant personality. Where Cassandra was steady and predictable, Jessica was spontaneous and exciting. She listened with rapt attention to his architectural designs, asking insightful questions that made him feel truly understood. In those moments, Dominic felt a spark he hadn't experienced in years. Dominic was a man of principle, devoted to his wife and the life they had built together. He tried to distance himself from Jessica, making excuses to spend more time at the office, or taking on additional projects that kept him away from home. Jessica, however, was not so easily deterred. She recognized the internal struggle in Dominic's eyes, and saw it as a challenge rather than a deterrent. She began to weave a careful web of seduction, playing on his insecurities and unfulfilled desires. One evening, as Cassandra attended a school board meeting, Jessica orchestrated a seemingly innocent dinner with Dominic. She prepared his favorite meal, opened a bottle of expensive wine, and created an atmosphere of intimacy that was hard to resist. As they talked late into the night, Jessica carefully steered the conversation towards Dominic's passions and dreams, areas where she knew Cassandra had never fully connected with him. Dominic felt a rush of emotions, flattery, desire, and overwhelming guilt. He stammered a response, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But Jessica had already sensed her advantage. She leaned in closer, her hand brushing against his. Don't you ever wonder what it would be like to be truly understood, to be with someone who sees you for who you really are? The tension in the room was palpable. Dominic knew he should leave, should put an end to this dangerous game before it went too far, but something kept him rooted to the spot, caught in the gravitational pull of Jessica's allure. As Jessica's lips met his in a passionate kiss, Dominic's resistance crumbled. In that moment, the foundation of his marriage began to crack, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to unimaginable tragedy. The weeks following that fateful night were a blur of stolen moments and mounting guilt for Dominic. What had begun as a momentary lapse in judgment quickly spiraled into a full-blown affair, with Jessica and Dominic finding increasingly creative ways to be together without arousing Cassandra's suspicions. Their rendezvous ranged from hurried encounters in Dominic's office to carefully planned business trips that allowed them to escape the watchful eyes of Millhaven. Jessica reveled in the thrill of their forbidden romance, each secret meeting fueling her sense of triumph over her sister. For Dominic, the affair was an intoxicating mixture of excitement and self-loathing, each encounter leaving him both exhilarated and racked with guilt. Jessica, ever the master manipulator, knew exactly how to keep Dominic ensnared. She played the role of the perfect lover, alternating between passionate temptress and vulnerable confidant. She would listen to his frustrations about work and his unfulfilled ambitions, offering the understanding and validation he craved. "I've never met anyone like you, Dominic," she would whisper in their intimate moments. "You deserve so much more than this small town can offer you." Her words were carefully chosen, planting seeds of discontent in Dominic's mind about his life with Cassandra. She painted vivid pictures of the future they could have together, a life of excitement and passion, free from the constraints of small-town expectations. Dominic found himself increasingly torn between his growing feelings for Jessica and his loyalty to Cassandra. The double life he was leading began to take its toll, manifesting in mood swings and uncharacteristic behavior that didn't go unnoticed by his wife. At home, Dominic's guilt manifested in a mixture of emotional distance and overcompensation. There were days when he could barely look Cassandra in the eye, and others where he would shower her with affection. Driven by remorse, he threw himself into his work, taking on more projects than ever before, using his career as both an escape and an excuse for his frequent absences. Jessica, for her part, played the role of the doting sister-in-law to perfection. She would engage Cassandra in long conversations, feigning interest in her day-to-day life while secretly reveling in her deception. There were moments when a flicker of guilt would cross Jessica's face, a brief recognition of the pain she was causing her sister. But these moments were quickly suppressed, overshadowed by her desire for Dominic and her deep-seated need to finally outshine Cassandra. As the affair progressed, the risks they took became greater. They began meeting in more public places, their need for each other overriding their caution. There were close calls, a neighbor who almost caught them in an embrace, a colleague of Cassandra's who saw them dining together in a neighboring town. Each near discovery only added to the intensity of their relationship, the danger becoming part of the allure. But as weeks turned to months, the strain of their deception began to show. Dominic, once energized by the affair, now found himself constantly on edge. The guilt was eating away at him, affecting his work and his relationships with friends and family. He began to question whether the passion he felt for Jessica was worth the destruction of the life he had built with Cassandra. Jessica, sensing Dominic's internal struggle, doubled down on her efforts to keep him engaged. She became more demanding of his time, more insistent in her declarations of love. Her manipulations became more overt, playing on his guilt and his desires in equal measure. As their affair reached its fever pitch, neither Jessica nor Dominic realized that their carefully constructed house of cards was about to come crashing down. The truth, as it often does, was quietly making its way to the surface, ready to shatter the lives of all involved. While Jessica and Dominic were lost in their passionate affair, Cassandra was slowly piecing together a puzzle she never wanted to solve. At first, the changes were subtle. A lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume on Dominic's clothes, hushed phone conversations that would abruptly end when she entered the room, and an emotional distance that seemed to grow with each passing day. Cassandra, ever the optimist, initially chalked these changes up to work stress or a midlife crisis. She tried to bridge the growing gap between them, planning romantic dinners and weekend getaways, only to be met with half-hearted enthusiasm from Dominic. Her sister Jessica, ironically, became her confidant during this time, offering sympathetic ears and reassurances that only served to twist the knife of betrayal deeper. But as weeks turned to months, Cassandra could no longer ignore the nagging voice in the back of her mind. She began to pay closer attention to the inconsistencies in Dominic's stories about late nights at the office and out-of-town meetings. She noticed the way Jessica's eyes would follow Dominic across a room, the barely concealed hunger in her gaze. One afternoon, while doing laundry, Cassandra found a matchbook from a hotel in a neighboring city tucked into the pocket of Dominic's jacket. A hotel she knew wasn't anywhere near his usual business haunts. The discovery sent a chill down her spine, the physical evidence making it impossible to deny her worst fears any longer. Torn between confronting her suspicions and the fear of what she might uncover, Cassandra found herself in a state of constant anxiety. She began to withdraw from friends and colleagues, unable to bear the thought of sharing her suspicions and making them real. Her sleep was plagued by nightmares, and she found herself watching Dominic and Jessica like a hawk, searching for any sign that would confirm or deny her fears. In a moment of desperation, Cassandra even considered hiring a private investigator, but the thought of strangers prying into her private life was too much to bear. Instead, she decided to confront Dominic and Jessica separately, hoping that one of them would crack under the pressure and reveal the truth. Little did Cassandra know that her decision to seek the truth would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to a confrontation more devastating than she could have ever imagined, forever altering the course of all their lives. The day of reckoning arrived on a stormy afternoon in late autumn. She'd spent the morning steeling herself for this moment, rehearsing what she would say, how she would remain calm and collected in the face of potential heartbreak. When Dominic walked through the door, shaking rain from his coat, he was met with the sight of his wife standing in the room, her face a mask of barely contained emotion. The tension in the air was palpable, and he knew instantly that their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. "We need to talk," she began, her voice quavering slightly despite her best efforts. "I know about you and Jessica." The color drained from Dominic's face, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. In that moment of stunned silence, Cassandra saw the truth written plainly across his features, and her last shred of hope evaporated. "How long?" she demanded, her voice rising. "How long have you been sleeping with my sister?" Dominic's shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew there was no point in denying it any longer. "Cassandra, I'm so sorry, it just happened." Cassandra cut him off with a bitter laugh. "You never meant to? What, did you trip and fall into her bed? How could you do this?" The floodgates opened, and months of pent-up suspicion and hurt came pouring out. Cassandra hurled accusations and questions at Dominic, her voice echoing through the house. Dominic, for his part, could only stand there and absorb her fury, offering weak apologies that did nothing to stem the tide of her anger. As their argument reached a fever pitch, the front door opened, and Jessica walked in, stopping short at the scene before her. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen in a tableau of betrayal and guilt. "Jessica, how kind of you to join us. We were just discussing your affair with my husband." Jessica's eyes darted between Cassandra and Dominic, her mind racing to find a way out of this situation. Dominic, torn between the two sisters, tried to intervene. "Please, let's just calm down and talk about this rationally." His words only served to redirect Cassandra's fury. In a fit of rage, Cassandra grabbed a vase from the coffee table and hurled it across the room, narrowly missing Dominic's head. It shattered against the wall, the crash punctuating her words. The noise seemed to snap Jessica out of her defiant stance. For the first time, a flicker of remorse crossed her face. Dominic and Jessica exchanged a look of helpless guilt before slowly making their way to the door. As it closed behind them, Cassandra collapsed onto the sofa, her body racked with sobs. The life she had known, the future she had planned, it had all crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. As the storm raged outside, Cassandra's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, shame, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of loss. In that moment, she made a decision that would set in motion the final tragic act of this sordid drama. The bartender, a grizzled man named Hank, watched with growing concern as Cassandra knocked back drink after drink. He had seen his fair share of patrons drowning their sorrows, but something about the wild look in Cassandra's eyes set him on edge. "Another," Cassandra demanded, her words slightly slurred. Hank hesitated, but the steel in her gaze made him think better of refusing. He poured her another whiskey, neat, silently vowing it would be her last. As the night wore on, the bar emptied out, leaving Cassandra alone with her thoughts and her drinks. The alcohol had dulled the sharp edges of her pain, replacing it with a bitter resolve. Around midnight, Hank gently suggested it was time for her to head home. "Need me to call you a cab, miss?" Cassandra waved him off, fumbling in her purse for her car keys. "I'm fine," she insisted. "I just need to get out of here." Hank reached out to stop her, but Cassandra was already stumbling towards the door. As she stumbled into the parking lot, Cassandra managed to get her car started. The engine roaring to life in the quiet night, she pulled out of the parking lot, her vision blurred and her reactions dangerously slow. The winding coastal road stretched out before her, a ribbon of asphalt barely visible in the moonlight. As she drove, Cassandra's mind was a chaotic whirl of emotions: anger at Dominic and Jessica's betrayal, shame at not having seen the signs earlier, fear of the uncertain future that now lay ahead of her. The speedometer crept higher as she pressed down on the accelerator. It was on a particularly treacherous curve that disaster struck. Cassandra's dulled reflexes failed her, and she took the turn too fast. She felt the car begin to slide, tires screeching against the asphalt. In a moment of terrifying clarity, she realized her mistake, but it was too late. The guardrail gave way with a sickening crunch of metal, and suddenly Cassandra was airborne. Then darkness consumed her as the car plummeted over the cliff's edge, tumbling end over end towards the jagged rocks below. The first rays of dawn were just breaking over the horizon when Officer Liam Murphy received the call. A jogger had spotted a wrecked car at the bottom of Whispering Cliffs, a notorious stretch of coastline. Murphy, a seasoned member of Millhaven's small police force, felt a sense of dread as he made his way to the scene. The sight that greeted him was grim. The car, a silver sedan, was barely recognizable, having been crushed by the impact and battered by the waves. As the rescue team worked to extract the vehicle from its precarious position, Murphy began the somber task of piecing together what had happened. The license plate, miraculously still intact, quickly identified the car as belonging to Cassandra Blunt. Murphy felt his heart sink. He knew Cassandra, as did most people in Millhaven. The thought of delivering this news to her family weighed heavily on him. As the morning progressed, and the full extent of the tragedy became clear, whispers began to circulate through the town. Cassandra Blunt, dead in what appeared to be a drunk driving accident. It seemed impossible, completely out of character for the woman everyone knew as responsible and level-headed. Detective Sarah Watson, called in from the nearest city to lead the investigation, sensed there was more to the story. Her keen eye noted details that didn't quite add up: the lack of skid marks on the road, suggesting no attempt to brake; the odd angle of the car's trajectory off the cliff; the fact that Cassandra had been drinking alone, something her friends swore she never did. When Watson arrived at the Blunt residence to break the news, she was struck by the palpable tension in the air. Dominic Blunt's reaction to his wife's death seemed oddly muted, tinged with guilt, and the presence of Jessica Lawrence, Cassandra's sister in the house at such an early hour raised immediate red flags. In the days that followed Cassandra's death, Detective Watson immersed herself in the investigation, peeling back layers of Millhaven's seemingly idyllic surface to reveal the turmoil beneath. Her first step was to retrace Cassandra's final hours, a task that led her to the Rusty Anchor and its reluctant bartender Hank. Hank's account of Cassandra's state on the night of her death painted a picture of a woman in deep emotional distress. She was knocking him back like there was no tomorrow, he told Watson, guilt etched on his weathered face. I tried to stop her from driving. This testimony conflicted sharply with everything Watson had heard about Cassandra from friends and colleagues. The woman they described was cautious, responsible, not someone who would drink to excess and then get behind the wheel. The detective's suspicions deepened. Watson's next focus was on Dominic Blunt and Jessica Lawrence. Their behavior since Cassandra's death had been odd, to say the least. Instead of grieving separately, they seemed to be leaning on each other for support, their interactions marked by meaningful glances and hushed conversations that would abruptly cease when others approached. A breakthrough came when Watson interviewed Cassandra's closest friend, Olivia Chen. At first, Olivia was reluctant to speak ill of the dead or cause more pain to the family, but as Watson gently pressed, the floodgates opened. Cassandra had confided in me just days before it happened, Olivia admitted, her voice quavering. She suspected Dominic was having an affair with Jessica. This revelation cast the entire case in a new light. Watson immediately sought to corroborate this information. Digging deeper into Dominic and Jessica's recent activities, bank records showed suspicious transactions, hotel bookings, expensive gifts that aligned with times Dominic had claimed to be on business trips. As the evidence mounted, Watson brought Dominic and Jessica in for separate interviews. Under the detective's relentless questioning, their carefully constructed alibis began to crumble. It was Jessica who broke first. Yes, we were having an affair, she confessed, tears streaming down her face. Cassandra found out that night. We had a huge fight, all three of us. But I swear, we didn't know she'd left the house after we went. Dominic, confronted with Jessica's confession, finally admitted to the affair but vehemently denied any involvement in Cassandra's death. We made a terrible mistake, he said, his voice hollow with regret, but I loved Cassandra. I would never have wanted this. Watson believed they were telling the truth about not directly causing Cassandra's death, but she knew their actions had set the tragic events in motion. The detective's report painted a clear picture. Cassandra, distraught after discovering her husband's infidelity with her own sister, had sought solace in alcohol. Her decision to drive in that state, while ultimately her own, was the direct result of the emotional trauma inflicted by Dominic and Jessica's betrayal. In the end, no criminal charges were filed in relation to Cassandra's death, but in the court of public opinion, Dominic and Jessica were already condemned. The truth of their affair spread through Millhaven like wildfire, forever tarnishing their reputations and ensuring that Cassandra's death would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As time passed, the raw pain of the events began to dull, but their impact on Millhaven remained. The town would eventually regain its outward appearance of tranquility, but its inhabitants carried with them the knowledge that beneath the calm surface of small-town life, passions and secrets could swirl with deadly force. The tragedy of Cassandra Blunt had forever changed the soul of Millhaven, leaving an indelible mark on all who called it home.